Alright guys, Red here. Today we're going to talk about the somewhat controversial game Star Citizen, and we're going to have a look at exactly what sort of state it currently sits in. This will by no means be an exhaustive list of negatives that I have found in my time with the game, and it won't be all negative either. I'll try as best I can to balance things where I see the need. It's also important to understand that this game is still heavily in development, and still undeniably in an alpha state. Now, commonly, a lot of people will probably jump on that and say, well, it shouldn't have been in development this long, clearly it's a scam, etc, etc. But actually, once you've been in the game and realised the scale of what has been achieved already, and what they are aiming to achieve, it's easy to see where the majority of that time has went. That's not to say there hasn't been some majorly sketchy decisions made in the game's past, and some things that were promised a long time ago might have changed here and there as the development direction has narrowed or expanded its course, either for better or worse. But right now, if you pay a pretty reasonable $45, you get access to the entire game and a small ship that you can fly without having to earn it in game. And rolling in the background is that game. You can fly to all these places and you can get out and walk around, perform missions and do tasks. Hunt bounties, mine asteroids, salvage ships. There's first person combat missions, cargo, racing and a big bunch of other stuff you can perform for credits basically. All in this massive, immersive, multiplayer online star system. And it's worth it, 100%. It's probably the best 45 quid I ever spent. But that brings us to the first topic that we're going to cover here. And that's how this game is funded. From the outside, if you've never followed along with the development process, this is probably what strikes people as the weirdest thing about the game. Now, I've heard opinions like it's pay to win, it's like NFTs, it's a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, etc, right? And if you take the long development and the pervasive bugs, which we'll get to, and the Cloud Imperium storefront where there are ships on sale for over £1,000, and you sprinkle a little cynical reporting here and there by the media, it's easy to see where this image came from. So I'm going to lay out how that funding really works, and then you can discuss the pros and cons yourself. Because the reality is, there isn't really another game with a funding model like this. So, to play the game you buy a pledge. A pledge comes with access to the game and a starter ship. Nothing crazy, just something small, like this, and that's it. You're in the game. You don't need to ever spend another penny. You can buy all the other ships in-game using in-game money, and that's the whole story. You're happy, the developer's happy, everyone's happy. You get in, you go to your hangar, and there's your starter ship. So you're flying around and you're like, wow, this is a really nice ship. You're taking in the nice views, you're learning how to fly, and then you see some guy with a ship just like yours, but with a flashy paint job. So you ask around and you're like, how do I get that paint? And that's when you're directed to the store. Now, there are a couple of paints in the game, but only for a few ships, and they are severely limited. So you jump onto the online store in real life, and that's when it dawns on you why this game gets its reputation, but also why it made so much cash. And the reason is marketing. The marketing team at CIG are absolutely insanely good at their job. And I'd even go as far as to say possibly borderline predatorial at points. But we'll get to that. Now obviously you don't need to buy a single thing, but you'll start to notice a lot of the items in the store operate on a limited time basis, which means they only go on sale at certain times of the year for limited periods of time. And this generates this fear of missing out. And some of the paints and stuff are just, I'm going to try and not mince my words here, absolutely delicious. Maybe they have a Valentine's theme or a Halloween theme, etc. But regardless of that, you find a decent selection of paints for most ships at a reasonably steep price point, to be honest. I mean, there are some in there that are only a couple of quid, but there are also some in there that are closer to like 20, which for a ship skin is, you know, a bit on the high side, but I don't know what everybody's used to out there. It could just be me. Definitely subjective. So that's the first thing many people might get a bad taste in their mouth about. You can't customise your ship in the game without spending money. Okay, so that kinda sucks, But the counter argument to that would be that the development is ongoing, so if you're inclined, it's a good way to keep the game funded. But essentially, these are microtransactions, and that's usually enough to put some people off. So anyway, you're in the store looking at paints, and your wallet's already trembling. Then you see this option, upgrade your ship. And you're like, well, what does this mean? So you open it up, and for a mere £5, you can upgrade your little starter ship into something a little better. Maybe a bit faster, maybe carries more cargo, has more guns, whatever. Now for about an hour or so of playtime in-game, you could do a few jobs and earn enough credits to buy that ship in-game with in-game money, and then you'd have 2 ships to choose from in your hangar. But in the end, you decide to upgrade for £5, and you're pretty happy, because you've heard about wipes. What are wipes, you say? Well, let me tell you about wipes, because they are a possible variable that might influence a person's decision to upgrade their starter ship. Every now and then, the underlying database of Star Citizen gets completely reset. Now this could be because they have new tech they need to put in, maybe there's massive changes to the economy, maybe a lot of new materials need added, maybe there's been too many exploits and some people have been duping millions of components for cash, and it's clogged everything up and slowed everything down. There's lots of reasons why CIG would need to do a full wipe of the game servers. Now, as I stand here, this hasn't happened for a whole year to my estimate. So it's not too bad, because it doesn't happen that often. But when it does happen, you lose all your in-game ships and money you've made. You'll be left with whatever you paid real money for in your hangar. As you'd expect, if you've got a little upgraded ship there now, you quite likely have a few more options coming back right after a wipe. Maybe you can get around faster. Maybe you can move more cargo or shoot more ships, meaning you can earn more in-game credits faster than you could with your starter, right? Now, I've got to say here that I don't believe for a second that wipes are in any way, shape or form intentional on the developer's part to drive sales. For the time I've played, the wipes have been few and far between, and have always been solidly justified, and the players have been able to verify that. You know, we've been able to access the new assets that they've added after the patch, so it's always kind of made sense. But you can see how this might encourage people to upgrade from that £45 starter package into something a little more capable. And obviously you will get people who just want to avoid the grind, and maybe they've got disposable income and they will go crazy and start each patch with a massive luxury yacht or something, because they just kept on upgrading and upgrading all the way to the most expensive ship in the game. And I suppose it's their money, right? If they want to help fund the development of the game this way, then why not, right? And I'm going to cut in here and just say that might seem like pay to win, and by definition it probably is. But the game's open-ended in a way that there's no real forced competitive play. And stuff that is competitive, say the racing and the PvP dogfights, etc., are all in small ships that can be bought pretty early on for relatively low amounts of credits in game. And on top of that, all those activities can be avoided for the most part anyway. But even if that weren't the case, the cheapest and smallest ships in the game up to this point have always been pretty untouchable by the bigger, more expensive ships, just because of movement speeds alone. So sure, it technically probably is pay to win, but nobody's really winning. And if you want to go and fight people, you kind of have to go looking for it. It does happen sometimes that you get pirated and stuff like that, but in that scenario, you're usually not in a fighter. You know, you're in a cargo ship or something, so you were screwed anyway. Anyway, we're talking about funding, so the only possible negative that I can perceive here is possibly the one the marketing team are pulling. And again, let me caveat this by saying these guys are just doing their job, and doing it well. But if you are an impulsive person, or aren't good with managing money, then there are a few carefully constructed pitfalls to incentivize you into spending your cash. Let me explain. So at the basic level you have this ascending ladder of ships that go from the cheapest to the most expensive. And if you're okay with spending some extra money on the game, you're probably going to look at it like this. I want to upgrade my small starter ship into something I can make loads of in-game money with straight after a wipe occurs. Or, eventually, when the game is finally released and goes live, I'm in a ship that I would prefer to start the game in. So say you want to get yourself up to a prospector mining ship. Now, you're only spending £5 or £10 here and there over the course of months or years, and along the way, you're getting to try out this big range of ships in between, without having to grind for them all in the game, right? So far so good. You're not noticing being out of pocket, the ships in game are cool as hell, and you're having a great time. Except these upgrades aren't always available. They are sporadic and only go up on the store a few times a year. Most shift depending on what seasonal thing is happening or what sale CIG is putting on. And that limited availability, again, creates this fear of missing out. On top of that, they will do what's called a Warbond CCU. So this is just the same as an upgrade, but it's for a cheaper price. So an upgrade that was $20 might now just be $5. And these might seem to cut a chunk of your upgrade path out. You string a few of these together, you can now get to your prospector with having saved $40 or so overall. And that's all good, and it makes the customer feel like they're getting one over and winning somehow. But everyone knows it's the company that always wins from a sale. You've still handed over money for an infinitely reproducible digital product that you might not have done otherwise. And that feeling of gaming the system can be pretty addictive. And I know for a fact there will be people out there who have fell into that rabbit hole at their detriment, because it feels like a game. Can you chain enough of these together when and if they become available to make an astonishing saving? It may take some time and patience on your part, but if you can plan ahead and take advantage of some of the links in your chain lining up just right, then you can make a tidy little saving. Of course you can. And CID will often forge parts of the chain for you by making sure the ones on sale all link up end to end. It's like a meta game you can play outside of the game. Is that really a bad thing? Well, not really. At the end of the day, it's still optional and it funds the game, right? The only weird thing is that you could have just bought the ships in game by actually playing the game, but now you've essentially bought a prospector mining ship for $150. Like, it is a bit weird that you would have the desire to do that, right? But on the other hand, it's hard to blame CIG for people simply wanting to buy their product. And people really do want to buy their product. Because the store doesn't just stop at upgrades. For an absolutely eye-watering amount of money, you can choose to straight out pay to add any of the ships on the store to your hangar. All available in limited time sales, of course. And as you might have seen in the news recently, you can even just buy packs of all the ships for the price of a small house. Why would they sell this? Well, because people will buy them. Maybe to skip the grind, and giant organisations in the game will pool their resources to acquire them for large groups of players, and to fund development. But still, why? Well, to be honest, there is no deeper reason than because they want to, or because they can. They are all aware they can buy the ships in game. And if you've been watching the showreel in the background, perhaps there's the beginnings of an incline as to why people would want to keep funding this game, and why it's taken so much money and time to build. The video doesn't really cover the half of the integrated systems that overlay the game, some of which we'll touch on later, but even to have seamless transition from a city to space to another planet's surface with atmosphere and flora and fauna and an MMO with no loading, and for it to look this good is no minor achievement. And when you think you can have all of this for just $45, it's hard to argue that people didn't get value for money. and anything extra they bought was done primarily in the knowledge they were helping this game grow. But it's not all been smooth sailing. Some of the original backers have had the distinguished privilege of watching the development roadmap shift over the years. For example, some of that pledged money went to build an entirely separate single-player campaign called Squadron 42. Not much can be argued with there. Development time for the multiplayer game has inevitably been extended due to the resource shift over to the single-player game. Whatever your feelings are there, personally I feel like Squadron will ultimately benefit the multiplayer game both financially and likely help to diversify the skill base and assets that will eventually make it into the multiplayer. But that does remain to be seen, and doesn't change the original point. The focus was undeniably shifted somewhat away from the multiplayer that was promised. And that's likely not the only thing that the course of development has or will sacrifice for one reason or another. Needless to say, the original Kickstarter backers do have valid ground when they say parts of the game they were promised never materialised, or never materialised on time. But it could also be argued that the game's scope broadened on such a scale that there were guaranteed to be sacrifices along the way. Other reasons as well, such as simply poor management on CIG's part. That expanding scope has meant several things have had to be written and rewritten instead of having a concrete outlay. The game seems to have evolved instead of being built from a solid plan, as better ideas and systems have been opted for over existing ones. That's not usually how game development works. There's normally not the funds to explore so many forks just to then abandon them for something else. But it's hard to deny that it's definitely interesting, and may come out the better in the long run for having that flexibility and freedom. So anyway, to get back on track, the game is funded by backers pledging money to the game for ships and skins and upgrades, which apart from the skins can all mostly be bought in game. Which means right now you're probably wondering how bad the grind is then that people feel the need to pay real money to avoid it. And honestly, it's not that bad. The final economy isn't set in stone, but a lot of the time there's been ways to make multiple millions in an hour doing various careers. And the ship prices range from a few $100,000 all the way up to say 90 million currently. When capital ships start appearing, that will likely increase further. The bigger ships aren't really designed to be flown solo though, so perhaps some of that cost can be shared between players who tend to work in groups. In my experience, the grind is nowhere near unreasonable, and is actually really enjoyable given the multiple ways money can be made. And as far as I can tell, people just pay real money because they want to. They see what the project is, what they're trying to do, and want to bolster and show support. And in doing so, they get a permanent ship or skin unlocked for their use in the game. So a lot of people, depending on their respective disposable income, think that's worth it. And it's hard to argue against because it's their choice. The only thing really sneaky about it is the fear of missing out thing, which isn't really that bad and is a totally viable way to sell a product. I mean, they're essentially not selling a product most of the time so that they can sell a product better by creating a little bit of hype around specific times in the year. And it works. It definitely does have a tangible psychological effect. Don't get me wrong, but the player always has a choice. Anyway, I hope this section has helped clear up a lot of the grey areas that surround the vast swathes of money that seem to steep this unusual game and its funding model. Anyway, this vid is getting a bit long, so hopefully you'll join us in part 2, where we'll discuss the game's inherent buggy nature at times, and go over some of the inbuilt game loops, and try and break down if there's any meat on the bones of this Star Citizen project. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my channel members, Nils Gerdes and Spacecraft. If you'd like to become a member, then you can possibly gain a few extra entries into the giveaways that appear across the channel. Apart from that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. 07 guys.